Hey, I think I got it. I see the little live thing here. Let's get going. Oh my God. I'm so sorry about that. I just closed the browser and tried it again. I don't know what happened. I'm assuming everybody's hearing me. I'm not even opening that Facebook page because maybe that had something to do with it. Okay, what time is it? 3:16. Here we go. Okay, my name's Debbie Harbeson, and I'm trying to give an unschooling talk. Welcome to Unschooling, Educational Anarchy for the Whole Family. I think I'm proving that right now. I thank everybody who's had something to do with this Agora.io. Special thanks to George for answering all my questions. Thanks, George, but evidently I didn't take in the information as well as I should have. Purpose of this talk is to discuss unschooling. What the heck is it, and how does unschooling work? In a word, unschooling is freedom. It's freedom for an individual to learn on their own terms, following their own interests. Unschooling is educational anarchy because there's an absence of a coercive authority demanding control over an individual's learning. The goal is for the learner to have as much freedom as possible. Okay, I'm going to get into this deeper, but first my background, and I got to take a drink after all that. Okay, my name is Debbie Harbeson. In some circles I'm known as the suburban voluntarist. In other circles I am known as the technologically disadvantaged. I have a husband, John, and we had two children, Melissa and Keith, who, by the way, have both joined us today on the Facebook chat, so you can talk with them. I didn't unschool from the beginning. They had just started the first and second grade when we took them out of school. After we did that, we never looked back, and they ended up homeschooling/unschooling through high school. I learned about educational freedom and unschooling primarily from education reformer John Holt. He was a great thinker, a great writer. I really enjoyed, I think by this point I have read all of his books. He changed a lot of people's views on education and learning and how we should treat children. He laid out the importance of giving freedom to children and just trusting that they were going to learn. Let's see. He helped me better understand what was happening already with my own kids, that they're born with a desire to learn, and adults just get out of the way and help them learn what they're already interested in learning. A note here, John Holt started me down the road to thinking about freedom in general and applying it to all aspects of our lives. But for me, that took a long time, and I really came to my political ideas and libertarianism and all that sort of thing probably really within the last 5 years. So a lot of that happened after my children were already out of my little nest. Even my views on education didn't change immediately. All of us have a lot of baggage that we have to deal with from our past experiences. Probably a lot of people who are watching this today, if you bothered waiting 16 minutes for me to sign on, we're probably not unschooled, we're probably not homeschooled, and so it's hard for us to wrap our heads around some of that after we were raised in different ways. The book I wrote, Okay Kids, Time for Bedlam, that book is really not about unschooling. It's more about my struggle to get there, to relax and trust my kids. And I hope that I told that story in a humorous way. You can get to that book and all of my projects through my main website, debbieharbeson.com. That book is available for free. All the chapters are online, and if you download the PDF, you get an extra little piece there. There's an appendix I put in where John and the kids answer some questions. So, I make no claims on being an expert on unschooling. I'm just one person who saw a lot of value in the idea, and once I learned about it, I did my best to implement it within our own family. So I'm here to share my thoughts and experiences. There are many others out there doing the same thing, sharing their thoughts and experiences, writing blogs. Some have written books. Anybody who mentions John Holt, in my opinion, is on the right track. Another point to mention here is that implementing educational freedom is going to look different in every family. Every individual is unique, and every individual family is unique. So what I'm going to do is share some stories and thoughts, but I want you to take those, the deeper meaning of those, and put them in the context of your own family. I do make one claim though. I am a champion when it comes to being an unschooling cheerleader. And I will encourage anybody interested. I will talk to you about it all day long if you want to. Don't worry, I'm not going to put on a slinky uniform and get out the pom-poms though. A Dallas Cowboy cheerleader, I am not. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to dive a little bit deeper to help you understand unschooling, and then relate how unschooling worked in terms of my family's experiences. So, what is unschooling? Let me take another drink. As a term, but it's very interesting. You already know you're going against societal norms when you use a word that's defined by something that it's not. The word itself means what? Not school, which can mean a lot of things. John Holt first used it just simply as a descriptive word to differentiate people who are in school and the people who were not in school. After he passed away, and people continued thinking and learning about unschooling, it's developed further, particularly as to pull away from the idea that some people, decide to homeschool, and what they end up doing is just emulating school or doing school at home. And unschooling is trying to get people away from doing that. Unschooling does not mean no education, and it does not mean an absence of learning. Some use terms like, you might hear child-led learning, interest-led learning, self-directed education, or just natural learning. What's the point is, or the point is, that it's all about learning. As with all other areas where we talk about freedom, the focus is on the individual. We're talking about self-ownership here again. For the individual learner to follow their own interests, and then when an unschooling family really gets rolling, it's just a family living and learning together. They don't separate things. Life is learning, and learning is life. There is no school, and there is no not school. It's just absent. As I hope you can tell by now, unschooling is not a teaching method. It's a philosophy based on the understanding that learning happens naturally, and we're all born with the ability to learn. And given freedom, respect, and trust, kids are going to learn. Again, it's just living life. You will hear a lot of unschoolers kind of shrug their shoulders and say, we just live a life. We just live our life. John Holt really got that it was about freedom. He understood that freedom opens the mind. If we get out of the way, learning's going to happen, and we need to trust that process. This conference is a good example of educational freedom. There was all of these things offered all weekend, and if you were interested in one, you jumped in and you took a look at it. If you weren't, you passed it over. And then on the other side of the thing, people thought, hey, I might have something I have to offer to the people that would come to this conference. I'm going to throw it out there and see if anybody wants it. So again, it's all just about that freedom, that anarchistic way of getting some mutually beneficial things going. Let me try 2 ways to make this more concrete and relative to everyone's experience. Think about how we think about learning from the time a child is born. Nobody really worries a whole lot about really young children's learning and their ability to learn. We know that a young child in a healthy environment is going to grow, and they're going to learn. They're curious. There's this great big wide world out there that they're going to want to explore. You put a rattle in front of a little kid, once they learn how to use their hands, they're going to grab it. Once they learn how to crawl and they see something interesting across the room, they're going to go for it. They're curious. They want to explore. What we really want the childhood education to do is to keep that, because here I am at the age I am now, and I'll just let you guess how old I am. But I've had a lot of years behind me, and there's still a big wide world out there that I want to explore. I'm not going to have enough time to explore it all. We want to keep that natural curiosity. So it just doesn't stop when school starts. When the compulsory age for school starts, learning doesn't stop, but control comes into the picture. Our anxieties start because some people put some control in there. And what you try to do with unschooling is just pull, just get away from all of that. You can't stop learning. You can control learning, someone else's learning, but you can't stop it. And you also can't control what lessons they might learn. Let me give you a couple stories about Melissa and Keith. And again, they're in the chat right now, and if they want to correct me about anything, they can do that. When Melissa was in first grade, and like I said, we took her out at the beginning of second grade. Her first grade teacher, they were doing Danielian, which is a type of printing. It's not the ball and stick, but like if you make a T, you put a little curve. The idea is to make a transition to cursive. Melissa has always loved the craft of doing something, so she didn't mind doing that. She enjoyed that. But they were doing some letters one day, and Melissa made the letters T space. She wanted them to put a space between them. T space H, T space H. She walked past Melissa and said, "No, I want you to put them closer together. T H, T H, T H." So she starts putting them closer together. Teacher came back, "No, that's not what I said to do." And Melissa said, "Yes, it was." "No, it wasn't." "Yes, it was." "No, it wasn't." I don't know how long that went on. But finally the teacher said, "That is not how I told you to do it. Do it the way I told you to do it." So when they got to the teeth gritting stage, Melissa just stopped, and then she came home and told us about it later. When Keith was in first grade, his teacher had this idea that she wanted the class to always recite things out loud. I don't know if she thought she was getting their attention. She was actually really helping them retaining something, but they wanted to recite it out loud. Keith wasn't really very interested in what she was telling him, and he figured out after a while, that she would do that a lot, and so here's what he did. He just moved his lips. I don't know how long this went on, but it did go on for a while until she caught on, and he got in trouble. Now, with both of these examples, John and I were not at all unhappy with what our kids did. Melissa stood up for herself when she knew she was right. Keith realized at 5 years old that what he was doing in school was pretty much crap, and he didn't want to deal with it. So he learned to do that with his mouth, finding a very creative way to avoid, that situation without bothering anybody. And those are some qualities that, frankly, we wanted to keep with our kids. But did they learn some lessons from the teachers? Oh yeah, they learned lots of lessons, didn't they? Domination, authority, control. So anyway, that's just an example of what can happen in schools. We got our kids out of there. And unschooling and the qualities I said that we liked in our kids from those two stories, unschooling maintains and develops the curious, inquisitive mind, keeps that creativity that Keith had. They investigate things, they learn to question everything, they are confident in their ability to learn. If something comes along that they haven't figured out or learned yet, they can figure out how to do it. Just like it took me a while, but I figured out how to get this Justin TV thing going, didn't I? Anyway, the kids' ability to move in through adulthood that way, isn't that just the kind of people that the world needs? One other way to think about it is, now think if you grew up in a situation where you had adults around you who understood this philosophy, who understood unschooling, and gave you the freedom to live your childhood that way. Take a second and think about what you would have done with that freedom. We're all going to answer that differently. And this is, that goes into what I'm saying about your family is going to make unschooling work differently for you. I'm checking my time, 3:30. Okay. Okay, so all this theory and pie in the sky is fine, isn't it? But what about when the rubber hits the road, when your kids are sitting there at the kitchen table throwing macaroni at each other? How's this going to work? Let me continue on with those two previous stories that I told you. Keith was not interested at all in what was going on at school. He wasn't ready for that stuff. He didn't care about it. He had more important things, and I forgot to say that about the story. When we asked Keith why he did what he did, or when, how he figured out that with moving his mouth, he said, "Well, I just figured out that if I did that, she would leave me alone, and I could go ahead and use my brain to think about the stuff that I wanted to think about. There's a story in my book, I think the title of that one is Toast. And by the way, all of the stories in the book, although there's some exaggerations in there, they're all based on real things that happened. Just ask the kids about the ketchup on the ceiling. Yeah, that happened. The Toast book, or the Toast story, Keith did take apart my toaster, and I wanted to use it at the time it was laying all over his floor. But we saw that he wanted to tinker, he wanted to work on things, so we went to Goodwill. You can go to secondhand store, yard sale, and we found some old radios and stuff, and gave him a screwdriver and said, here, play with this. Let's see how it works. With Melissa and the cursive writing, she was already interested in that. The teacher didn't have to do, any of that stuff that she did to try and get her to do it. She thought it was pretty cool. She ended up, we got this little calligraphy book, and she moved on with that interest. And speaking of writing, Keith was never into that when he was younger. He didn't care. If I wanted him to do something, he would want to punch it on the keyboard. But sometime around 12 or 13, he decided he needed to learn cursive. So I went to Walmart or Kmart or someplace and got one of those books about cursive and gave it to him, and he took it in his room, messed around with it for about 3 weeks, and then he was done. He threw it in a pile on the floor of all the other stuff that he had in the pile on the floor. And I asked him what that was about, or why he decided he wanted to learn cursive. And he has very good handwriting, by the way. He said, well, I just got to thinking, there might be some day when I do something cool or I become famous, and if I do, people are going to ask for my autograph. And if they ask me for my autograph, I want to give them a cool autograph. So that was his reason for learning cursive at 13. And it took 3 weeks. I don't even know how he did it. He did it. So what's your role? Your role is the resource person. Holt was very clear on this. Just give kids access to the world. Explore the world with them. And they will learn. And then as you get rolling, you just don't even think about it. There's another story I have. John's business has been computers from the beginning. He did some programming, and by the way, when I started homeschooling, John started his own business. So we went from a family who, the kids were in that school and John was working for somebody else. We jumped into a completely do-it-yourself, I guess you would say, do-it-yourself family all at once. Somebody came over to our house that worked in a factory. He was a manager, and he wanted John to program something. So we were sitting in our living room working on this. We were living in a small place at the time. And the kids were in the room watching TV, and they were watching a show about spiders, those nature shows. It was close up on the spider and making the web and stuff. And the guy was watching them, and he looked at John, and he stopped. He said, I'm sorry. He said, but I just have to ask you all a question. Okay. He said, how do you get your kids to do that? What? How do you get your kids to sit there and watch a show like that? My kids would never do that. They would take one look at that show and say, oh, I'm not watching that. That's an educational show. I need to learn something from that show. I'm not watching that. And we just didn't think about it. It was just something that was cool. But I want to caution you not to think in terms that like everything your child is going to do is going to look educational. Did the kids watch shows like that all the time? No. They watched plenty of cartoons. On the other hand, with cartoons, you will not believe, if you sit down and watch cartoons with even the most ridiculous cartoons have some very interesting things going on in them, and you would never know there were some very interesting conversations we had as a result. Bouncing off the cartoon thing, and again with Melissa being the crafty person that she is, crafty meaning projects, not sneaky, although Melissa is pretty sneaky too. We got into, like when we were in sand by the beach, sculpting. She did sculpting, so we would do it in the sand, and we would do it when it snowed. And one time we made a cool, like a Tyrannosaurus Rex dinosaur, hanging down like this, and then Keith built a little man down there screaming, and the neighbors people would stop as they drive by or walk by and take a look at that. And then that was one of our successes with the snow. Another time it snowed, she and I went out, and she wanted to make a SpongeBob. So we were working on figuring out how to do it and using coat hangers to get the snow to stick for the arms and stuff. And we had a pretty neat looking SpongeBob. We tried to color it, but that didn't work very well. But it still came out pretty cool. A little bit later, some kids knocked on our door, some teenagers, and they asked for permission to take a picture of it. they were running around town, and I don't know what part of the yearbook this is for because I don't know anything about how they do yearbooks now, but taking pictures of things, and they thought this SpongeBob would be a great picture for their yearbook. Maybe all these kids grew up on SpongeBob or something. But it was just really funny to me that they wanted the sculpture done by another teenager who hadn't even set foot in their school, who had been out of school developing her own interest and her skill in sculpting, and created this SpongeBob that they ended up wanting to put in their high school yearbook. Just seems kind of interesting to me. And then on the so let's say I was talking about cartoons, or you never know what's going to happen. And then another story with Keith is there were there at the beginning, I think my husband wasn't really sure like about math or how that stuff would work, and we did have our ups and downs with that. But one thing convinced him, and he just stopped thinking about it altogether. He took Keith to a ball game, a U of L ball game, and they went to the snack bar, and John gave him $5, and he said, "Here, get whatever you want." So they walked up to the snack bar, and Keith is this little old guy, so he's down here in the corner, and John, and so the guy selling the stuff looked at John, and John said, "Well, don't look at me, he's got the money." So Keith's looking at it, and if you hear John tell the story, he would tell it like tink, 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 tink. You could just hear Keith's brain tinking inside there. And he said, "I want a hot dog, a popcorn, and a small Coke." And John looked at it, and figured out that Keith figured out the most items that he could get and still be under the $5. And once John saw that, that was just it. And we laugh about that and money and math, and that all we had to do with Keith was put things in terms of money, and bam, he had it. So you can do a lot yourselves, and now there's the internet and Google. Punch something up, and all of a sudden you got a project. I was doing something the other day, I don't even remember what it was, but I saw this thing called a marshmallow gun, and it was very cool. And so I thought, man, how cool would it be? The kids were younger now too. But then don't forget about friends and family and community, the general community, and also the homeschooling community. Although if the homeschooling community, if you can find some other people who understand unschooling, it's going to work out a lot better. But Keith was really into dinosaurs and fossils and rocks, and so I happened to see there's a group out there called the Kentuckiana Geological Society, or the way I would say it, a rock club, people who like rocks and stuff. And we went there, and they just loved it. I mean, Keith loved it, and the people loved that Keith was there, and they just meshed with their interest, immediately. And it went even deeper, one step deeper than that, because there was one guy who really just took a shine to our family. He really got what we were doing, and he had special permission. He was doing some project, and he could go to a quarry, and he invited our family to go with him one day. So we spent a Saturday in this quarry with this guy, and it was just the most fun ever. He took us around, and he showed us where to break certain rocks, and we came home with some samples with these crystals sticking way out of these rocks. And it wasn't that he sat there and gave us a lecture on how we were doing something. It was just part of doing the project, where he would say, "Okay, if you want a sample here, you're going to break it like this because the cleavage," and he would explain that. And my husband was having such a good time, and he stepped back a minute, and he said, "Oh my gosh, we're raising a couple of nerds." And the guy looked at him, and it was an amazing thing that this guy did. He said some things back to us that I can't even remember exactly how he said it now, but he just totally got everything we were doing with unschooling, and he said, "No, your kids are cool. That's what school does to people." And you could tell he was really hurt in school for some of the interests in the way that he was about things, and he totally got what we were doing. He totally got unschooling, and he gave us a good lesson that day, explaining it back to us. Melissa had some of the same interests, same experiences. She was into gardening, and I had a friend who was very into gardening, something called a master gardener, and they kind of bartered and traded with each other, and they had a very mutually beneficial interactions where Melissa learned things from her, and Melissa was also helping her do some things in her garden and do some things in our yard. Melissa became part of this Master Gardener group, and that even was something that had more of a structure to it, but it wasn't a big deal. I mean, Melissa wanted to do that. She was 13. The next youngest person was like 30 something, and they just loved her. They just loved that she was there. They just both, it's common interests. She ended up doing lots of things with that group. Let's see what time it is, 2:41. Doing something called sunflower trials that I'm just not going to go into right now because my time's running out. So there's people out there in the real world doing real things, and you just connect your kids with them. What about evaluation of things you do? Well, that's the same thing. The projects or the things that your kids do are going to have natural extensions of that. And it's intrinsic as well. They know they've done something well if they accomplished a goal. Back when Keith, in computers again, there's this new thing called HTML. And these things people were making called web pages and web design. And Keith learned how to do that. And he learned how to create web pages. And when he wanted a web page to do something and he got the code to work right, well, he passed. I mean, he did what he wanted to do. And a couple of organizations we belong to asked him to make web pages for them. So that all rolls together. Melissa with her gardening. If you got some delicious strawberries and crunchy cucumbers, then there's your evaluation. She wanted to grow roses. She knew roses would be hard. But she tried it, and one year, we were looking at the thing, and she goes, "Oh no!" And I said, "What?" She said, "Well, those are aphids. I'm going to have to figure out how to get rid of those." So she also had to go deeper than that and figure out, is she going to be organic or is she going to use chemicals? So it just all flows together. A couple other points to make here. Let's see. Keith was always a night person, and I want you to know that learning happens all the time. And frankly, I think maybe a lot of Keith's learning happened while I was sleeping. He's a night person. I'm not. I would get up sometimes to go to the bathroom and go past his room, and we had them go to their room at some point in the evening because John had to get up and go to work, even though the kids didn't. And there were rustling and crunching and hammering and puttering and all kinds of stuff going on in there. I don't know what all the projects he was working on, but his brain was cranking then, and that's when he was doing a lot of his learning. I don't want this to sound, and then some people will say about that, well, that's not real life. You can't do that sort of stuff in real life. But again, that doesn't matter. Unschoolers are going to jump into real life following their own interests. And the constraints don't matter if it's something they really want to do. If there's some hoops they have to jump through, then they'll jump through the hoops. Some unschoolers will look at this and they'll jump through the hoop. Some unschoolers might look at it and say, I'm going to go around that hoop. And then the others might look at that and say, oh, there's a hoop there. Screw that. I'm going down this path. So, our two kids went to college, but all unschoolers don't go to college. Some unschoolers have some very creative, cool things that they're doing, and if you investigate things out there, you'll find them traveling or whatever. And our kids did a lot of that too. But still, you're going to have concerns and anxieties and people breathing down your neck, maybe even the state. Hold on. Every day is not going to be bustling with learning activity. I'm trying to tell you some things that happen to give you stories. There were some days where I would tell myself, oh my gosh, if Melissa lays on the couch another day in a row, I don't know what I'm going to do. And this is something I found out later, frankly, years later, and it's because I kept a journal. As I could see whenever they were going through those times that there was a point later when there was this amazing burst of energy and activity. I mean, their bodies and brains were just digesting things and working on more things, and then they moved on to something else. You don't always see that when you're right in the middle of this stuff, okay? But it happens, and it convinced me that learning happens every day. It's just hard for us because we can't see inside their mind. We can't see what's going on. So with these anxieties and doubts that you might have, find a way to process the thoughts. I wrote in a journal, and it was very helpful to me. But if you don't like to do that, I mean, make a video, make a podcast, or just jot things on a calendar. Go back, if you have to do any reporting or anything, go back later and pull out the stuff that you need. But don't let those guidelines focus you on where you're going to go. You do your interest and then pull it out. I'll help you do that. There's people out there that will help you do that. Be an unattached observer and be a scientist of sorts, and pull away and get those anxieties out in your journal or something so you don't transfer them onto your kids. I was moderately successful to that, or maybe they, I don't know. I don't know if I want the kids to say how they were or not. Anyway, I guarantee if you go back later, it's going to be much better. You're going to see a whole lot more than you can see when you're just right in the middle of it, living it. I have a blog, another one of my projects. It's called Homeschooling is Freedom, where it's a takeoff of my book, Okay Kids, Time for Bedlam. And again, you can get all this stuff from DebbieHarbeson.com. You can link to everything there. But that blog has over 90 people now, 90 unschooling families, or 90 families who filled out 4 questions, many of whom are unschoolers. You can do a search on unschooling or unschooler and probably find most of them that way. But those are really cool to get into the lives of a real quick peek into the lives. But I would like to get more. There are probably some unschoolers out there watching this right now wondering what I'm going to say about unschooling. You probably have some good things to say. I would love if you would go to my blog and answer those questions. I'm really, really wanting more unschoolers, and in particular, I'm really wanting more libertarian-minded unschoolers. Okay, that's a tiny sample, and if you read my book, you would know this would make sense, that what I've just told you is a computer screw in a living room full of motherboards and memory cards. This talk is not really meant to be about my family. It's about me sharing some experiences so you can translate the philosophy and how it would work in your family. Trust your kids. They already know how to learn. They are naturally curious. Understand that learning is life. Get out there with your kids and live the pattern of your life. Learning will happen. Let me end with this. On the appendix of my book, if you download the PDF, you can read the appendix. I asked Melissa and Keith to describe their educational experience in one word. Melissa said adventure, and Keith said exploration. Now go out there and forge your own path. Oh, and remember, I'm a cheerleader, so contact me if I can help. Go to DebbieHarbeson.com again for links to everything. By the way, some people have said my book has made a good read aloud for kids. Okay, I'm going to try and see if I can go to the chat now and see if anybody has any questions. I don't know, maybe we got a few minutes. I'm hoping Melissa and Keith were able to get some things going. Let me see if I can get to this place here. I'm afraid to even click anything because I'm going to shut down. Okay, I'm in the chat now. If anybody has anything they want to ask me or want me to clarify, I guess I've got a few minutes to do that. 3:50. George, what have I got? Maybe 5 more minutes for that. So here's, I see some discussions. How to teach kids after moving overseas. Not really sure. Well, I understand that question, unless you all have been talking about the difficulty of unschooling in some other countries. I know some other countries it's almost impossible now. I'm thinking maybe even Germany. Somebody says 5 more minutes? Okay. So we got 5 more minutes. Okay, I can actually see myself and see the chat like I wish I could have for the first 16 minutes of this talk. Does anybody, looks like some discussions really going back and forth here. That's awesome. I hope I made sense in that talk. I felt like I did it kind of rushed because of what happened. Um, what's up with the new media interest in bullying, and how can we prevent laws from being made that attack free speech? Let's see. To become a couch potato, something interesting Melissa says in the appendix of our book. She was always having people ask her or tell her, "Oh my gosh, don't you just watch TV all day?" And she would be like, "No, just that's boring." If you have the chance to do things like that, if you have the chance to be a couch potato, you don't want to be a couch potato very long. It's boring. It's just not that much fun. The reason you want to be a couch potato is because you just haven't had the chance to have some freedom to get something flowing. And or being a couch potato under certain conditions is when that brain and that mind is digesting things so that you can figure out something that you want to go out and do. What if your kid's already grown up, gone through state K to 12? Anybody at any point reading John Holt books, you're going to change a lot even about yourself. I didn't get a chance to talk about how I changed through this whole process, but I changed a lot. And like I said about being curious, some of us get through school and we still, I was really into reading a lot and stuff. But now I forgot what the heck question I was answering. So read John Holt books. They're I think of Freedom to Learn Instead of Education, How Children Learn, How Children Fail. Any adult reading all those books, you will learning all the time. I think that's a book that John Holt wrote later on in life, where thinking that he wrote that about his experiences when he started really unschooling and really getting all that baggage out of his own head, and he started to learn to try to play the cello late in life. And there's some things like that in that book, I think. But I said that too, Mom. Okay, Melissa. Somebody's saying I experimented on my kids, I threw some put them in little test tubes, and let's see, I charge them when they don't turn off their lights. Okay, let's see. Okay. So which books do you or others who have read him recommend most? I think I just said several of his books, but there was a book club that just did Instead of Education. I looked at some chapters that I had actually copied and put in my file cabinet. Those Teach Your Own and Instead of Education were the only two books where I actually still had things that I had copied pieces from that were in my file cabinet. So I guess for me, those really said a lot for me. So I would recommend those two books, but I haven't read anything by John Holt that I didn't think was awesome. He also did a magazine, Growing Without Schooling. I just sent a pile of those to somebody who I think's in the chat right now. Zeke gets those. Maybe we can pass those around to everybody. But there were on unschooling.com. I saw in archives there they have some of the Growing Without Schooling magazine in there. That was an awesome magazine. It was very cool. If you can find that or take a look at that, did you find that helpful too? Okay, 3:55. I think I need to sign off now so the next person can take, I don't know what, 15, 16 minutes to figure out how they're going to get on to this channel. Thanks everybody, and I will see you later. Let me go sign off here.